All right, so without any further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Gitte Bendzulla, who's the Chief Operations Officer for Deezer, France. Can I have a round of applause, please, for our guest? Thank you so much. Yes, this is perfect. And may I ask Marc to join us, please, if he's available. Marc du Moulin, who's the Secretary General of ECSA, the European Composers and Songwriters Alliance of Belgium. Fantastic. And online we have with us, I believe we have Godwin Tom. Can you hear us, Godwin? Yes, I see Godwin.
I can hear you, yes.
Fantastic, and we can hear you also. Godwin is the Managing Director of Sony Music Publishing, Nigeria. Fantastic. And finally, but not least, we have Keziah Myers, who's the Executive Director of Advanced Music Canada. And lovely of you to join us, Keziah. I'm a filmmaker, producer, director, and I'm also the Vice President of the African Artists Association, a non-profit in Los Angeles. And the purpose of that is to demystify the entertainment industry in general. And part of that is to basically shed clear, concise, and current knowledge about the industry. And so what I'd love to be able to do, just to start us off, is to get a clear sense of, if you could each introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit more about the company that you work for and what your focus is in that space. And let's start with the two of you who are in this room, if we could. So since you're next to me, maybe we can start with you, Gitte.
Okay, so that's on.
Nice pants, by the way.
Thank you, I got the memo. My name is Gitte. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Deezer. Deezer is a globally operating music streaming service, so you have to think about it in a very similar way like Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music. But we are French headquartered, which makes us different, and we have a slightly different approach when it comes to go-to-market. We are distributing not only directly in the B2C business, we are collaborating with partners across the globe like Sonos, RTL in Germany, a lot of telecommunication providers like Orange, others, but also a retailer like Mercado Libre. This is how we bring music to the people. And in terms of my role there, I'm overseeing the entire B2C business, so that's primarily how we distribute music, how we engage with users. We're doing all the annoying price increases. They are coming out of my team, all the annoying messages. But we are also building the beautiful playlists and artist activations that we share with the world. We are present in 180 countries, focus markets UK, France, Germany, Brazil, and we have about 600 people globally working for Deezer.
Thank you for that. And you, sir?
Yes, so my name is Marc du Moulin. I'm the Secretary General of ECSA, the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance. We represent 59 associations of composers and songwriters across 29 European countries in Europe. We are based indeed in Belgium, although I'm French, I think you can hear that. And so our job is to represent composers and songwriters in Europe. That's what we are. That's why we are based also in Brussels, very close to the EU. And our job is to form this alliance and lobby on the composers and songwriters' behalf to make sure that composers and songwriters can get like a fair remuneration, get good social and economic conditions. So we focus to a great extent on contracts, and we have 3 committees. One which is more about contemporary classical music, another one which is popular music in the broad sense, and another very important one which is dealing with the issues, challenges, opportunities for film and media composers in general.
Fantastic. That sounds great. I'd like to definitely dig a little into that and get clarity on that. Godwin, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your area of expertise and focus.
Hi everyone. My name is Godwin Tom. I'm here in two capacities, really. Primarily as managing director for Sony Music Publishing. Sony Music Publishing is the #1 publishing company in the world, representing extensive catalogs across the globe. I oversee activities and operations for the business in West Africa and parts of East Africa as well. And, the focus obviously is expanding the business. But what we've tried to do in the market is protect the interests of a lot of the writers within the market, especially the legends. A large chunk of the music being put out in the market are sampled music from older legendary catalogs. And we are focused on protecting the interests of those writers. So what we've done is we've not tried to force or buy their catalogs. We've tried to help guide them through identifying the true value of these catalogs. So cleaning these catalogs up, ensuring their metadata is done, the administration is done. Happy to say one of our highest earners is one of these legends as well. So for us, it's fixing those issues while we want to make money, but we truly believe that if we're going to make any money, we have to invest in the market. Right now, there's no collective society that's functional. And, there's so many issues. So we've come into the market. We're the only big publisher that has come into the market with boots on the ground. And we're doing this work with the Music Publishers Association of Nigeria, an organization that are trying to protect the interests of local businesses in the publishing space. On the other side, I'm the founder of the Music Business Academy for Africa. And what we focus on primarily is education. We have over 1,200 universities across Africa, and none of them offer music business management as a course. And so what we've tried to do is provide that as a solution for the market. We are currently on our 5th year, and we currently have about 500 students in the program. So yeah, excited about that and happy to be here.
Wonderful to have you, Godwin, and so many things that you've touched upon there. I think we might need a longer session than this one to kind of delve into some of that. But looking forward to speaking in the limited time that we have. And if I can now go to you, Keziah, can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your focus, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's pronounced Keziah, just for reference.
I'm so sorry, and I'm
Keziah
going
is
to
not an incorrect pronunciation. It is just
my
pronunciation
niece is Keziah, so if I do mess up during the course of this,
it's okay.
I apologize.
There is no problem at all. I will still respond. Keziah, like I said, is not incorrect. It's just not the way I pronounce it. The biblical pronunciation would be Keziah. So, hi everyone. I am Keziah, and I am also here in two capacities. The main capacity I'm in here for, or I'm attending, is here in this panel is because I am a subject matter expert and that has worked many years in the royalties licensing space. I was overseeing licensing at SOCAN, which is a collective in Canada, a performing rights organization in Canada, and I was overseeing licensing for a number of years. And then I moved into the member side, where I was overseeing the operations of the infrastructure that supported 175,000 members across 2 countries, and ensuring that their rights were protected, that their interests were protected, that they were receiving the royalties that were due. And, being in that space, of course, I was very, very connected to the film and television side, and what placements and synchronization rights look like, and ensuring that that these members understood their rights and how to navigate within these spaces. Furthermore, how to connect with the music supervisors in these spaces and have their songs go just a little bit further than the radio or the stage. And so I focused on that for many years. As Godwin had said, there are countries that lack the infrastructure around collectives. So I was also responsible for advising and consulting Ghana's collective, or forming collective at a time, and ensuring that there was an understanding of what the interests of the creators would be, so that they themselves would be able to take their business practices beyond, take their business practices to a place that they didn't think existed, which is essentially being the creator of that work and having that used and sampled over time, and receiving the benefits and the royalties that come from it. So that's one capacity that I'm here for, I'm here within. And the second is I'm the executive director of Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective, an organization, a national organization in Canada focused around the upliftment, empowerment, and progression of Black music business professionals within the business infrastructure. We are responsible for supporting about 1,700 Black professionals and advising them on how to navigate the corporate music industry, but then also lending support to the corporate industry, sharing with them the impact and the value and the resource that comes when we start to broaden our employee task force. And by broadening our employee database, we now can see that there are artists that are coming from the African diaspora and other genres that are more well understood, because the fabric of your company has it reflects the population, it reflects the music coming out of Canada and furthermore out of the globe. And so we're really focused on that diversity piece to ensure that the music does as well as it can.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'd like to start with trying to get a clear sense of, there seem to be so many problems currently when it comes to sort of individuals, musicians particularly in this space, being able to kind of truly access. I'm not sure if it's a quick case of knowledge. I'm not sure, again, as an outsider to the music industry. I'd like each of you, because there are different regions kind of being covered on this panel, I'd like each of you to kind of give me a sense of what are the challenges that are currently existing in the space that you're having to deal with. Can you just kind of break that down? Because we'll have people looking at this who need to get a clear understanding of the different territories, because music, like most of the arts, transcends borders. So can you give us a clear sense of some of the challenges that you're finding in your particular spaces? Thank you. And that's for each of you. So we'll start in the order that we have it here. We'll start with you, Gitte. And how do we pronounce your name?
Gitte.
Gitte.
Okay. Gitte, yes. Well, that's a very good question. Maybe let me focus on one thing that we observe specifically when we are discussing royalty distribution, not only with the major labels, but also with the publishers, the collective collecting associations. It's really, I wouldn't describe it as a lack of knowledge. I think the broad strokes are somewhat clear. Yes, it's very complex, but I think this is understood. But to access the knowledge, you need insight and data. And I think this is, from our perspective, still an area where everything is a bit all over the place. That starts with the lack of a unified, I would say, data terminology It starts with kind of like the length of the supply and the distribution chain we see in the music. There are labels involved, associations involved, business managers involved, artist managers involved, until you as a composer or as a creator in the broadest sense get really an understanding of how your music is exposed, is distributed, is consumed. It takes a very long time and a lot of data get lost during the way. Not out of bad intention, but out of a lack of an aligned view on data, and just also a lack of the right tools that are used across the industry, I would say, to process these data. So I would say that's one of the challenges we are facing when it comes to royalty distribution.
So for us, your question is very good to me, because we just published one report about audiovisual composers contract. I'm happy to, share it. It's available on our website, and so I'd like to focus maybe on the challenges that we see for audiovisual composers contract, because for us, if we talk about composers that like for pop music, hip hop, classical, it would be quite different. So I'm gonna focus now on the audiovisual composers issues they find with contracts. We published this report after a long consultation with our members to try to understand all the challenges they face when they sign contract with, can be producers, VOD platforms, and so on. So first of all, they feel very much in a weak bargaining position when they sign with producers who are often working for big VOD platform, big streamers, and so on. So very often the producer is just in an intermediary between the composer and Netflix, Amazon Prime, you name it. And so weak bargaining position, which means that very often they cannot fully understand the term of the contracts. They feel also that it's very opaque, because all those contracts are under non-disclosure agreement. So they can't even share with us or with their association their contracts, which makes it very difficult to get data about those practices. But we still manage to get a lot of their impressions. And we have seen in the last year a proliferation of buyout practices, and by that I mean that usually as a composer working in the audiovisual sector, you get one commissioning fee, and then you get royalties depending on the exploitation, on the success of your work. And very often what we've seen in contracts is that you just get the commissioning fee with a buyout contract under US law, even though, and under the work made for hire doctrine, even though you are a composer in Europe working on a European production. And for us, this is something which is not acceptable, also because in 2019 there was the EU copyright directive in Europe, which says that you should get a proportionate and appropriate remuneration for the use of your works, and you should also get transparent information about the exploitation of your work. So there is this issue of buyouts, which we hope the European Commission will look at, because for us it's simply a way to circumvent existing law. Then a big issue as well is what we call coercive publishing or pseudo-publishing, which is the fact when you have in such a contract the producer or the broadcaster acting like if they were publishers and taking a big part of the publishing rights, although they are not doing the job of legitimate and good publishers. And for us, we work well, our members work well with publishers. They think publishers play a very important role. But what they see is that those producers, broadcasters are basically grabbing the rights to get, royalties from very often the CMOs without doing the job of a publisher, which should seek to exploit your work. So this is the two practices that we see as very problematic. Then we have also other issues like on moral rights. So moral rights, it's a bit complicated because it's not harmonized at EU level. Some countries like France, Germany have strong moral rights. Some others, it's weaker. But still for us, in the time of AI, the right to have your proper credit, the right to protect your integrity of your work, those are things that are very important.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. There's a lot in there to get through, and certainly as a filmmaker, I certainly resonate with the non-disclosure agreement part of things, which does seem to create a barrier to being able to navigate this. Godwin, if you could please just give me your thoughts from your perspective.
I was just thinking, where do I start? So in the market, we have quite a number of concerns, and I'll try to be as quick as I can as I go through them. So the first thing is the laws. First of all, we do not have laws that protect.
I don't mean to interrupt you there, Godwin,
Yeah.
but as much as we have a limited time, I'd rather that you actually took us through it as thoroughly as you could.
I will do my best.
Fantastic.
We have an issue with laws, right? So we do not have a legislature that understands intellectual property. So that's the first start. So talking about frameworks, developing policies, it's almost impossible. So that's the first issue that we have with how composers and rights owners are treated. It starts with policy. We don't have as much. We recently in Nigeria had a Copyright Act, but that act was over a decade in the making, and obviously by the time it was passed, quite a number of things were removed from it. So we're fighting to add those things back into it and continue, because it's supposed to continue to evolve, right? So that's one of the issues we have. The other issue, as I said, obviously, because the legislator isn't aware, it's difficult to have these conversations with them. So you find yourself in legal cases where rights owners are going to plea for, the law to protect their interests. You have judges who you have to explain to them. For example, if you had to have a conversation with in court about someone who stole your intellectual property, you'd have to liken it to a property. You need to say things like, judge, it's just like my house. If I built a house and somebody came in to stay in the house, you have to do these things because they can't actually understand these things. So that's another issue in most parts of Africa that we're dealing with. The third issue, I would say, in protecting the interest of copyright owners or rights owners are the rights owners themselves. So most of them do not participate in the process. So the collecting societies are not functional because nobody is checking them. Usually the rights owners have a responsibility to go in and say, what are you doing with my creations? And nobody's asking those questions. The people asking those questions are people like myself and lawyers and a few other people. So that's the third issue. I think in terms of speaking directly to the film industry and how rights owners are interacting with them, we have the concern of the fact that most producers in the market are not educated enough in understanding how to, first of all, budget for movies. So we had at Sony in 2023, December, we had meetings with over 73 producers and filmmakers. And one of the things we found as a recurring issue was 1, budgeting issues, 2, education. Most of them had broken so many laws that as we explain how the industry and how the process works, they kept panicking as the conversation went on because they had made so many mistakes already. So there isn't any education guiding them. In terms of budgeting, and I'll use an example, when they go to people like Netflix or Amazon or whoever to discuss movies, what we find they've been doing is they usually under budget because over time they've just made do with what they had. So having a conversation with an organization that has the funding, you're not sure how much you should ask for, so you don't negotiate yourself out of an opportunity. And that's a big concern that we have. And I feel to an extent, some of these companies do have a responsibility to get these filmmakers and producers to say, look, we have this budget, go develop a film based on this budget, because that then helps them. But the bigger issue with the budgeting is music is usually thought about last in these cases. So everybody's trying to sort out the production, the cast, etc. And at the end of the film, you then say, oh, this is what we have left. And when that happens, there's a difficulty with finding the right music, because then you have to just create and do with whatever your budget can afford. And then there's also the issue of consistently doing that to the point where the musicians with the right music don't want to interact with you, right? And so those are some of the issues. I could go on and on, but I think in terms of, for the purpose of this conversation, these are some of the challenges that we're facing in the market dealing with the film industry.
Fantastic. Again, we're going to need to extend this panel because there's a lot to delve into here. In order to keep myself out of trouble, I will now go on to you, Ms. Myers, to...
Trouble. Told you I would answer either way. Thanks, though. Yeah, I'm actually going to start when we think about the issues that the rights holders have. And, what we see often is the lack of knowledge. Godwin just talked a little bit about, the lack of understanding and knowledge, and I'm going to say that I would see the same thing. There's a lack of knowledge and understanding about rights and the rights that your work as a rights holder has. And so if you have a lack of understanding about your rights, you now don't necessarily understand the opportunities that are afforded to you, or you're not in conversations with others as you negotiate film spaces. And so the lack of knowledge of those rights holders is not only on the creation side, but also what legs does my work have? Once I've created something, where can it be seen? So I definitely think that there's a lack of knowledge here in Canada, at least, and many of the creatives that I've worked with over the years that think that their music, so they have a catalog, and that catalog is not necessarily all going to be released music from, on their EPs or their albums. What else can I do with my catalog? And so there's definitely that lack of knowledge there. And now we're seeing more people understanding that music is embedded into the visual side. And, a reason why that this has become more obvious is because if you're watching a show, oftentimes it will now have an indicator of who the song is connected to. And so now you have more people who are saying, oh, my song can be in a show, my song can be in a movie. I would say also that an issue that we see is that there are a number of people on the film side who don't necessarily understand that they could be working with someone who hasn't done this before. And so that person doesn't know how to interact, questions to ask. And when they're looking for music, we've seen that a lot of times they'll go to the same people and ask them over and over again, not broadening the spectrum to other music, other sounds, which ends up putting you in a position where you may not have the right sound for the right scene, or you continue to use the same people, which doesn't really share the pie in the same way. So those would be, I would say, the two issues. One from the rights holder side, around lack of knowledge that this is possible, and then on the film side, continually going to the same people and not necessarily looking beyond that to bring in others, or they don't know who else is out there because that interaction hasn't happened.
Understood. Thank you for that. There seems to be a kind of recurring theme, which is about the need for greater knowledge, whether it's within the music community, it's musicians themselves, or whether or not it's the various infrastructures. And as you pointed out, Godwin, even in Nigeria with the law itself, and it seems to be a recurring theme about this kind of knowledge. Music is one of these areas which is so synonymous to all of our lives, and even music in film, yet it seems to not sort of take the level have the level of importance in terms of clarity around this. I imagine, Gitte, that this is partly due to the fact that we're moving so fast in terms of the technological changes in that space, but I'd kind of like all of you, I'll start with you, Gitte, but in terms of talking to me about why is that landscape so opaque? Why isn't there greater clarity?
That's a very good question. That's probably a very long answer. I'm trying to make this short, and it's really my opinion that I'm sharing, and I've not been brought up in the music industry, so I should maybe say this. I'm coming from online dating, other type of e-commerce distribution areas. And it amazes me as well how opaque, how intransparent, and how little organized the music industry is. And you mentioned, is it maybe the speed with which we are moving and technologically advancing? I mean, music streaming services are existing for 15 years. So it's not necessarily a speedy environment. And I think when it comes to developing the legal framework, when it comes to developing the associations, etc., it is even slower. So what I see, and it's really my personal opinion, is that how little the entire industry, not only publishing, not only creators, not only major labels, are embracing the technological advances, but also the different user perception of music. I wanted to get back to something that Keziah said earlier on, and also Godwin, and you mentioned it as well, Marc, is there is a, maybe as part of a lack of knowledge, there is a power imbalance that is perceived. And it's very interesting that we see it as music streamers, we see it entirely different, because music is no longer discovered in music streaming. It's truly discovered outside. And when I'm talking to a creator, I'm primarily talking to performers, to artists, but most of them are turning to be songwriters, composers themselves. So I think there is a shift in paradigm that is happening there. But when I'm talking to them and they say, so what shall we do for our music to reach our audiences, to create fandom? I said, stick to the music supervisors of the streamers, stick to the film industry, because this is where music is discovered. And I think there is also gaining this confidence and understanding of power and impact. And you said it, you are from the film industry, you said, well, this is so counterintuitive. So I think, there are deeply rooted, very, very old institutions and structures that have to be broken up. And I think everyone is a little bit afraid of losing equity. But I also think there is a lack of confidence with composers and creators in general about the power they have, because music is discovered by people and no longer distributed by streamers or labels, etc. But that's a very personal view on the situation.
So 2 points maybe on this. I fully agree that, you know, in a way the streaming, you know, era was also built on the basis of old inequalities. If you look, you know, more or less at the share of each player on streaming services, so I'm more speaking about like Deezer, Spotify now, but more or less you have like 1/3 going to the platform, you know, 55% going to the label, which then gives, depending on the contract, I would say 10, 20% to the artist. And then you get the publishing rights, like around 15%, which has to be shared between publishers and authors. And if you look at this repartition, it comes obviously from the pre-streaming era, from the CD era, where you could in a way understand that a lot was going to the label because he had to manufacture CDs, do much more in terms of distribution. But this repartition is still there. And for us, we see an issue here, and a repartition that basically does not value enough the value of the songs and the value of composers and songwriters. Then, of course, there is also competition issues. In the music industry, you have, as we know, three majors dominating quite a lot the market. And of course, when you're doing much more money on the recording side because of the repartition with the performers than on the publishing side, you may have an incentive to push for recording in your licensing agreements. Then just wanted to follow up on what Godwin was saying. It's true that it's very hard for composers and songwriters to have an idea of what they should ask to their contractual counterparts. For us, we in the EU Copyright Directive, there are some good principles for fair remuneration, and there is an encouragement for collective bargaining agreements between authors association and producers, broadcasters, and so on. Unfortunately, there is not a strong willingness from the other side to sit, at the table and discuss this. And the issue we have, it's a bit of a complex issue of competition law. But if you are an author association and you want to publish recommendation on how much a composer should be paid for a documentary, a feature film, an opera, something else, they cannot do it because it's considered as price fixing under competition law. So, and some authors organizations have been fined because of this. And obviously,
Wow.
in this sense, you have sometimes the contractual counterparts who are telling the competition authorities to do something against those recommendations. And so we are, in terms of law, it's a bit complicated, but we are in a strange situation where if you have a collective bargaining agreement and those recommendations being agreed, it's fine. But then if it's only recommendation coming from the author association, you may face big competition issues.
Wow, that's something I completely was not aware of, and clearly that needs, from a legal perspective, to be ironed out. Godwin, your thoughts?
Well, I think when something doesn't work, somebody benefits from it. It's just how things work. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, there are people who are trying to keep the status quo to ensure that they continue to benefit. I think one of the most important things for me, and part of the reason I joined Sony, which made Sony Music Publishing specifically, was because of a conversation I had with John Platt. And I think that played a very important, we sat down and I said to him, look, why should I join? Right? And I think the response was, look, we're the biggest company in the world and it's time for us to put some humanity into the business. And I think we've come to this point as a business, and most times you sit in situations where things don't favor the big guy, the big player, and then they fix the system to favor the big player. So why is the music industry so important yet so unclear? Well, it's because, one, certain things that are needed are not available. Education, for one. I think this is something we'll repeat on a regular basis. When you speak to writers, I'll give you an example of something an artist said to me, or a writer said to me, a producer. I said to him, why don't you have a publishing deal? And this is not signed to Sony. This is, why don't you just have a publishing deal? And his response was, well, if I sign with you guys, you're going to mess up the money I'm collecting from BMI. And I said to him, well, I said to him, that doesn't concern me at all. That I have nothing to do with that.
Right.
That's your money. That nobody's going to stop you from making that. And I think, and this is a producer that's part of a Grammy-winning album.
Wow.
So when you look at it from that perspective, you will see that if the top guys don't even know, and nobody comes out to tell you they don't know, if they don't know, what do you think the guys who aren't getting as much opportunities are dealing with? So that's the first thing. There's a lack of education. Two, the people who have the education do not want other people in the room because they believe it stops them from making more money. I'm sorry, I'm going to say these things because that's just the way it is. I've sat in rooms and I've asked questions, and somebody would sit with the artist, and this goes out to lawyers, this goes out to managers as well. I've been a manager. I was a manager for 16 years, right? So I'm asking these questions not because I'm being difficult, it's because I see it happen. I've been in meetings where a lawyer is asking for a deal, and I'm asking questions, and the lawyer is saying, can we go to your office and speak for a bit? And telling me, I don't think I've already cleared this with my artist. And I said, if you've cleared it with your artist, why are you worried that I'm bringing up the question with the artist in the room? So there is a big issue with people who are aware and have some of the information, stopping the people who don't know from accessing that information. So that's another thing. And this is done in market. So you'd say, for example, in Nigeria and in Africa, most Africans should be interested in ensuring that their people have more information and are more aware. What you find is most people who are in the rooms where there are opportunities are becoming gatekeepers to their own people and stopping them from accessing that information. So you don't have a lot of places within this place. And, I've said this in other platforms. I've had death threats because I have an academy training people. And, you would see it as, whoa, that's just a fair thing. Why don't you just let him do something that's good? But the reality is somebody's sitting down and thinking, why are you giving out all this information and having people coming to ask me questions about these things? So that's another reason why I believe it's so vital to how industries work, and it plays such an important role, but for some strange reason is vague. The third reason and the final reason I'll mention on this side is the internet. Now, the internet is a great place for resource, but it's also a fantastic place for confusion. So what we have is a lot of people who go online and they take whatever information they can find without checking or confirming if the sources are viable sources. So you would have a producer, for example, sit with an artist and tell an artist, this is what I want. And it's not based on any vital information that they have. It's just stuff they read from a lawyer who has a blog. And I think that's another thing. So if we have these platforms that provide resource, like WIPO, and we've spoken to them, and being a little bit more aggressive in passing out and pushing out their information to the general public and rights owners, it would be helpful, and more people would ask questions. And the more questions we ask, the more careful, unscrupulous people become about dealing with the rights owners as well. And I think I don't need to repeat most of the things the panelists already said. I feel these are other things I see from the market and where I stand.
Thank you for that. There's a lot in that also. Keziah, if we can get your thoughts, especially from the Canadian perspective maybe, and your general overview as to why the opaque nature of things.
Absolutely, thanks. I'm going to start with that issue being transparency, and Godwin just spoke a lot about it. The lack of transparency over time built on an industry that was very much about the person in control, the person with the knowledge, that person is the one who is going to benefit, and the usage of other people's works has brought us to where we are today. We are seeing a little bit of a shift, and I would say in the 60s, there would be no one like Godwin employed at Sony Publishing. I'll tell you that right now, because the idea of humanity within a publishing company and not having us take as much as we can of the 100% whole was just not that's not what the music industry is built on. If we really go back in the music industry, we see music that was stolen. If I look at something as recent as The Lion King, and the story of The Lion King is that it was that riff underlying in the jungle, the mighty jungle, that song is from a group coming from South Africa, and that the descendants of that group still to this day are living in impoverished situation and circumstances, I should say. And the lack of knowledge you can see, the lack of transparency you can see, the lack of attribution to where we actually got this riff line, this bass line is something to be considered. Bomb Bomb, which is a song done by Sister Nancy, it is a sampled song all around the world. And this woman from Jamaica, now living in New Jersey, has not seen many of the royalties attributed to that. But interestingly enough, her rendition is actually a sample of another group. And I'm pretty sure she hasn't accredited any rights to that other group. So, I would say, that's the lack of clarity is on purpose. The need for transparency is coming around. The increase of education is really important, and trust. And so education is one thing, but the need for trust. And I worked at a label for a number of years. I worked at Universal, and I remember signed acts who were no longer signed coming back and not realizing that the advance that they were given was a loan. And in fact, they thought that advance was not only to do their project, but if they didn't release their project, they didn't realize that there was a financial implication there. And so I, at the time, had said to the labels, we need to really consider, especially because the people that we're working with are not aware of the music industry, no history in the music industry, creatives who are really just there to create but don't have that back knowledge or education. We really need to create a handbook, because I don't feel great knowing that they're signing on the dotted line, not understanding all that comes with their advance and the deal, etc. So
thank you for that. I just want to take a moment here to just, because of what I'm learning from this situation, I was very transparent about the fact that I'm not a musician, I'm not in the music industry, but I am a filmmaker, so I'm part of the cohort who rely heavily upon music creators. But I want to take a moment here pertaining to Afro Film Music Days and just acknowledge how important this is. And I just want to give a shout out to Sydney Levine and Prudence Colong for putting on this event, because I think this is absolutely vital. Thank you. Now, time is running away from us, but I really want to just kind of, there are a couple things here. I want each of you to understand that because I have blind spots in the music space, if there is anything specific that you wish to touch upon, please do so at any point in the limited time that we have left. And the other thing that I definitely want to do is just kind of maybe roll a couple questions into one here, which is speaking about the fact that it occurs to me, and I'm going to be very bold and maybe even provocative with this, it seems as though there's just an outright desire for intellectual property theft on a certain level when it comes to the music industry. And this is also further compounded by the fact that individuals like myself, who are producers and filmmakers, relegate the music composer part of my consideration and therefore my budget to the very end. It's almost an afterthought. Everything goes up front first, and then this is sort of, we need to, and then you look for the cheapest, all of these that is the general practice. So between these two things, on the one hand, an industry trying to steal, and on the other hand, individuals who are making film relegating the use of music to the back end. Can we kind of have a bit of a conversation about what truly can be done about this? And obviously you are four of you sitting here as advocates for change, but how are we seeing this? Are we winning? I guess is the question.
How are we winning? I mean, first of all, I think we're winning with having people in the industry like the three panelists and having advocates outside the industry, but also having these platforms to talk about it. So I think we need to all take responsibility as senior managers in the industry, but we also need to come to terms. What are we expecting from our creatives, from our creators? Do we take the responsibility to be more human, to educate them, to protect them? I see a lot of artist managers just lately just waiting for the paycheck as fast as it gets, with as little consideration about the artist as possible. So who's responsible? Do we expect that creators are educating themselves? Where's the limit? So I think there is much more discussion to be held, because we are also expecting them to be creative, to think left-wing, to think beyond what the boundaries are and how to make most money. This should be a given, and that leads me to my second point. I think we have a strong mission to accomplish in valuing creative work differently. I mean, a lot has been discussed in the last 24 months about prices for music streaming services, but you have access for whatever, $8.99, $12.99 tops, to all the songs and all the tracks that are created in this world. And this is not sustainable. And I think this is the second point, and that's probably very similar to the film industry and the creators you're working with. We need to understand these are assets, and not valuing them, that will never get any lawmaker in the position to really care about it.
Yeah, I think, if I remember when I was a bit younger, like, let's say I was like 15 years old in the, in the 90s, before the whole, streaming revolution, I was buying CDs for what, like 15 euros, maybe for 15 songs. And now, I have for a bit more than 10 euros, but not even 15 euros. I have access to an infinite catalog of songs. And of course, it's great, as a consumer. But obviously, there is, some money missing here in terms of revenues. And if you think that the repartition has been more or less the same, there are big issues. I think then we made, I think, some progress to make sure that those issues, they are on the top of the agenda for policymakers, for the music industry. So this is a bit of, a glimpse of hope in a way. But then what I see as well as a big challenge is AI, of course, because AI might, and I think it's already the case for a lot of media composers. They see AI. Sometimes I know cases like of broadcaster who said, well, if you don't accept those terms, I'm going to use AI. So it's adding one more pressure to to all those challenges, I would say.
Let's maybe Godwin, Keziah, Keziah. Either of you, go ahead.
So I'd say this: the natural order of things is chaos. This is the reason why you have rules. And when you talk about people trying to take advantage of other people, it's not going to stop. If people could get away with running the red light, they would do it on a regular basis. People know that there are consequences for doing that. And that's the reason why they are very, sorry guys. People know that there are consequences for this, and that's the reason why they are very careful. They don't do it. I think the moment we begin to work together as a unit, and when I say a unit, it doesn't mean that we all agree. It means that we all understand our responsibility and obligations to each other. We will start to find ways to interact with each other. So I'll give you an example. When you talk about creators, and I've seen managers and lawyers do the most awful things to people they claim to care about, right? And if we cannot expect most writers and creative people think emotionally, because they have to tap into a place to create the music that we all enjoy. There are things that singers say that I don't know if I could think of myself. And I think we get to that point where we can't expect them to now log into that logical part of their brain immediately when we want to talk to them. This is the reason why we have management and people who should protect their interests. So I think when we're thinking about how we want to create frameworks and ecosystems, we have to create checks and balances. We have to figure out a way where we're saying across the music industry, across the film industry, how do we interact with each other? The same way we all interact with businesses, there are internal policies and there are external policies that guide and sort of determine how we interact with each other. This is very central for us to build an industry that is fair is relative, but that is reasonable, that is considerate. Another thing I want to say is it's important to recognize that the people who run the music industry are not musicians. And when we have that knowledge and that consideration, the need for these checks become increased, right? So you cannot blame a business person for thinking, well, how do we make the most money? So what do we need? We need to start having more people in the system that are questioning that mindset and saying, how about we protect the interests of the writers and of the creators? So these are some of the things, because there are so many problems, and we could sit around a bonfire and talk about these things. I think what we need to start thinking about is, what are these frameworks? What are these platforms? What are the associations here to do? And how do we transfer some of these opportunities into other markets? For example, as bad as the system is in Europe, there's a lot of help needed in Africa. There's a lot of help needed in Nigeria, for example, where we don't even have functional societies, but we have people leading those societies telling you they're the ones to talk to. And so we have to get to the point where we are able to check each other and work together to pressure organizations to do the right thing in the interest of the writers. But we have to understand that the natural order of things is chaos. And the only way we can make things work and be fair is to create order, create rules, create processes, create policies, and create legal frameworks that protect the interests of everybody participating in the industries.
Thank you, sir. Keziah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can say much after that. That is exactly what it is that we need. The industry operates on a scarcity mindset in both spaces. You have the business person who wants to ensure they keep the majority of their dollar, and then you have the creative who thinks that just a little is just enough or is enough. And so that scarcity mindset, recognizing there is enough for everyone. But in order for us to do that, I actually would echo what Godwin said. There needs to be an infrastructure that is understanding of every facet of the industry. If you think of a bank and you going to get a loan or a mortgage or even start a bank account, and you have two people who are a part of that that account, there are checks and balances built into the financial infrastructure that ensure that one person can't just come, you know, if this is the way you've set up your account, can't just come and take out all the money. There has to be conversation. There has to be an acknowledgement. There has to be a notification. I was supporting the blockchain efforts through SOCAN as a performing rights organization. And one of the biggest goals I had was that to see blockchain in an immediately hear a song or have that registered once it was registered at a PRO around the world, and have that immediately go to the rights holder's bank account, which also means that we would need to have active infrastructures and collectives on the continent of Africa and other places where it's not necessarily streamlined. But if, you know, in this area, if we're looking at PROs, there are many of them, and them talking to each other regularly by way of the rules that we would have to put in blockchain, which are subject to bias. So those too would have to be checked. But it automates a payment to a rights holder. But before we even get there, we have to ensure that the entire globe is on the same page in that capacity.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, it looks as though we're out of time right now, but this is a valuable conversation, and a few takeaways are just even on your last note there about an honest and maybe robust blockchain kind of situation. That's a potential for the future. Certainly, we need to eliminate the very dubious practices that have been established. There's a very good point that you made earlier, actually, Mark, which stands out, which is about the splits currently, which seem to have been related to a bygone era and no longer current. And but most importantly, just as a collective group, I'd really like to thank you all for the work that you're doing. And if I can have my audience also put their hands together for this. Thank you for joining us.